and so forth. So similarly, we have an analogous problem with essential properties. Now, we can characterize certain contexts in language and in thought as referentially transparent and others as referentially opaque. And that's an important distinction for Quine. So here's the general idea. We've got this notion of identity, okay? And there, or just expressed by is in English. And ordinarily, it allows us to substitute. So typically, we can substitute identicals for identicals. So here's an example. 2 plus 2 is 4. 4 plus 4 is 8. Well, I should be able to substitute 2 plus 2 for 4 in that equation to get 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 is 8. And that seems right? That works out just fine. And so ordinarily, this is a legitimate rule. Leibniz's law, in general, says that things are identical if they have exactly the same properties, and if they have exactly the same properties, you should be able to substitute one for the other. And typically, we can do that. If Dan Bonnevak is talking and Dan Bonnevak is the professor, then the professor is talking, etc. But now, there are some contexts where that fails. So we'll say that a context is transparent if that works. That is to say, if substituting identicals for identicals always preserves truth value. So it turns true sentences into true sentences, and false sentences into false sentences. And opaque if it sometimes fails. Which means it doesn't always preserve truth value. So Quine is worried about these opaque contexts, where we've got some situations where substitution doesn't always work.
In fact, identity. We're only confirming the Catholic teaching. The deeper problem is the fellow who thinks that quantity is substance. And that's not a problem for the Catholic faith. That's a problem for life. That's a problem even if you don't even think about God. Just like if you walk into a room and you're talking to other people and you say, oh, behold, a group of quantities. Right? You have a very deep misapprehension of reality. And the only reason that people who make these kinds of objections don't act in deeply inappropriate ways towards other human beings is because they're philosophically inconsistent. When they're practicing common sense, they treat things like quality and as different than quantity, living things as different than non-living things, and substantial human beings having human free will and being subjects of justice and injustice and being, agents of truth or falsehood. They treat all that as if it's real, but none of that is quantifiable. You can't quantify living things qua living. You can't quantify quality qua quality. You can't qualify substantial unity even of physical things like a diamond or a rock. You can't explain the substantial unity, which is more than the sum of the parts, only by looking at the quantitative arrangement of the parts that are coagulate in it. So, this is especially true when you talk about human personhood and personal identity around truth and volitional activity, which absolutely cannot be explained quantitatively. So when people think the universe is reducible to quantity and therefore substance is reducible to quantity, they have a mental illness that is not psychological, but is properly philosophical, that is much more grave than the nuances of theology. And the first remedy they need is sound metaphysics. After we've got that set out, then we can go back to transubstantiation and look at how the church's teaching is based on a sound metaphysical understanding of the structure of reality, where you distinguish quantity from substance, quantity from quality, and so forth.